Hey movie lovers, I'm your host Patrick, and this time, we're covering a 2021 Italian thriller Netflix release called A Classic Horror Story. The first scene pops up and a wall-mounted deer head can be seen on a wooden wall. The camera pans to a woman who's wounded and devastated and is strapped down on the table with a gag in her mouth. Her expression reveals extreme panic and fright. Meanwhile, a hooded figure comes into the room. Somebody is peeping and watching through a space in the wooden planks. The restrained woman struggles, but the hammer has already been lifted and is brought down with all the might at the climax. The next scene shows an RV camper van making its way down a long stretch of road. Meanwhile, a girl named Elisa is puking in a sink. As she gets seated in the cafe, she gets a call from her mother and explains to her that she threw up twice. Her mother replies with indifference that she should get the surgery tomorrow and get rid of the baby, and that it's for the best. Eliza seems hesitant upon the decision, but her mother remains adamant. Eliza ends the call and stares blankly into a painting of Jesus showing his punctured hands. During that time, the RV camper pulls up at the gas station and Eliza gets a notification from the TravelMate app that it's time to join her friends at the carpool. She gets up as her meal is untouched and leaves. At the RV, a guy named Fabrizio is recording a video, giving his introduction and describing the destination, Calabria, Italy. He spans the video towards a girl whose name is Sofia. Sofia describes that she's going to a wedding, and at that time, her boyfriend Mark jumps down beside her and hugs her. Another grave-looking man named Ricardo is also part of their group. He describes himself as a doctor. Meanwhile, Eliza comes up and Fabrizio is recording her. She gets a little uncomfortable, but the rest of the people assure her it's a video for Instagram. After this brief introduction, Fabrizio cuts the recording and they all start their journey. The van travels on a road along a plateau region amidst the trees. In the van, Sophia and Mark are playing trivia and asking everybody general questions. Mark then gets up and grabs beers from the fridge and offers everybody. Eliza is reluctant but eventually takes a sip. Fabrizio and Mark are reading about the case of a missing mother and daughter under the influence of the mafia. As they're discussing the new mayor who's playing a major role in cleaning the streets, Eliza gets sick and is about to throw up again. The van is stopped and she runs off to let it out. Back at the van, Ricardo tries to call his wife but cannot get a ring. He then sends her a voicemail and apologizes to her. As soon as his voicemail ends, he finds Fabrizio and Mark arguing about who's going to drive the van. Mark, who's apparently drunk, affirms that he can drive, so they continue their journey ahead. The night has fallen and Mark gets waves of sleep. He turns up the music and converses with Fabrizio about the good old movies and their plots. While they're having their moment, Fabrizio suddenly sees a dead goat right in the middle of the road and swerves the van to the left to save it from overturning the animal, where it crashes into a tree and everything fades out. The next morning, Eliza finds herself injured and down on the floor of the RV. She wakes up to see everybody carrying Mark and bringing him to the couch. His leg is severely injured. Ricardo, as a doctor, advises Sofia to get some sticks or poles to keep Mark's leg straight. She grabs the camping poles and Ricardo aligns the leg and straps it to the poles. He asks Eliza to call 118 for emergency help, but the network seemed to be dead. Sofia also tries, but her line goes dead as well. As none of it helps, Ricardo asks to go out on the road and seek help. For this, Eliza looks out of the window and to her astonishment, there's no road beside them. Instead, they're in the middle of grassland surrounded by forest. They see an old house in the middle and they all go there. Sofia knocks the door, but nobody answers. She looks through the window, but the cabin is empty. Ricardo advises them to go back to the RV, where Mark and Fabrizio indulge in an argument of whose fault it was that they crashed. Ricardo and Mark leave the van to look for the road. Meanwhile, Sofia sits beside Eliza and shows her videos of herself and Mark. They both share their experiences. Eliza says that she's a graduate of Bocconi. Sofia explains how she owns a small 3D jewelry making company. In the forest, Fabrizio and Ricardo are talking along and looking for the road when they both come to a halt. The amazement is visible on their faces. Back in the van, Eliza sees that the door of the old house has been opened. She gets curious and walks out towards the cabin. Meanwhile, Fabrizio and Ricardo come across a satanic ritualistic expression where 3 human straw figures with red hoods are created, and underneath them, 5 freshly cut pig heads are fixed on the spikes with a single board in front. The writing on it said, "The 3 Knights of Honor." During this time, Eliza enters the old cabin. She sees a wall-mounted deer head along with old picture frames on the walls depicting people as farmers, wearing goat and deer face masks with antlers. As she's observing everything, she hears the door close at the end of the corridor. She cautiously enters the room to find it made for worship or rituals. With burning candles on the floor and paintings of hideous creatures on the walls, Fabrizio then explains the legend of Oso, Mastroso, and Cargagnoso. First one can't see, the second one can't hear, and the third one can't speak. The three brothers who came from another planet and overpowered the earth made a cult and performed ritualistic sacrifices. In that sacrifice, they cut the tongue, ears, and eyes of the victim. After the sharing of legends, they decide to go back and spend the night in their van. During the night, Fabrizio remarks how they're all isolated and in trouble, a classic horror story. He says and then goes out to take a piss and witness two of the crazy masked farmers. Meanwhile, Ricardo, Sofia, and Eliza hear feminine screams from the cabin. Ricardo stays with Mark and the girls go to the cabin. Once inside, they open a trap door that goes to the attic. Back at the van, Ricardo is jerked by a thud on the van's windows. It's actually Fabrizio who warns him about the people in the woods, and they both run towards the cabin. Fabrizio urges everybody to go up to the attic. Up there, they see a little girl inside the straw shell. She's terrified and can't speak because her tongue was cut out and placed in a jar on the floor. While Sophia's trying to help the little girl, the light outside turns blood red and sirens wail. The girl starts crying. They all gather at the window to see the three Knights of Honor, dragging Mark from the van and bringing him to the cabin. Sofia tries to go down to his rescue, but she's intervened by Ricardo, and Fabrizio closes the trap door. They all watch as the three Knights bring Mark inside, put him on a table, and tie him up. One brings a huge hammer and breaks both of his feet and ankles. Afterwards, they bring an eye-crushing machine with iron spikes. They slowly lower the spikes, and to everyone's horror, eventually sink them into Mark's eyes. He screams and shrieks in agony while all of his fellows watch. He's eventually taken off the slab and dragged outside by those three creatures. The red lights and sirens shut off. In the morning, Ricardo frees the girl from the shell and she hugs Eliza. Eliza then asks Sofia to come down, who, after her boyfriend's gruesome death, is in shock. They all eventually decide to escape the forest and 5 of them run. They keep running until they come to a junkyard of cars. Ricardo looks for potentially helpful supplies but loses his temper at everyone around. Sofia faces him and blames him for Mark's death as he abandoned him and asks him why a doctor is in a carpool, whereas they travel by planes, trains, or cars. They continue their argument until Sofia walks away in a rage. In the meantime, Eliza makes her way to a car in which the little girl is sitting. She's got a diary, which Eliza sees and gets to know the girl as Chiara. Chiara writes to explain to Eliza that they are, in fact, not in a forest. As they are all outside, the siren is heard again. It's decided that leaving is the best option, and that's what they do. But, to their utter disbelief, they end up again at the old cabin. Their RV is gone and Ricardo bursts out at Fabrizio, who guided them, and now they end up here, again. They decide to wait in the cabin, and on the way, Fabrizio picks up a leftover beer bottle. At night, while everybody's sitting around, Ricardo explains how a small mistake resulted in the patient's death and it ended his whole career. He lost his wife, his daughter as well. Everyone just listens and drinks beer, all except Fabrizio. To lighten the mood, Fabrizio tells a hilarious experience which makes everybody laugh. While all asleep at night, Eliza and Sofia talk about their past and their parents. Sofia tells Eliza how everybody knew about her baby. She also offers her the heart-shaped 3D ring that was Sofia's first ever that she made. Afterwards, they all sleep soundly. Late at night, Eliza wakes up to the sirens wailing and the blood-red light all over the place. She gets up and steps outside to see a nightmare in front of her. A whole herd of farmers, the 3 Knights and all of her friends except Fabrizio, were tied up against the poles, and the stage was set for the ritual. She stands in utmost shock, but Fabrizio comes and takes her back into the cabin. Meanwhile, at the stage, all the farmers start clicking their tongues and ringing their neck bells while the Knights cut out Sofia's tongue and take her eyeballs out. They also cut Ricardo's ears and put everything at the center of a huge face and raise it up the pole towards the top of a huge straw figure. Afterwards, they mercilessly slice Sofia and Ricardo's throats. Eliza watches in horror as they both bleed to death. She whimpers and sits against the wall and Fabrizio tries to hug her. Eliza's mind suddenly clicks. She grabs a beer bottle and sniffs it. She realizes that it was Fabrizio who drugged everybody. She listens to instructions from Fabrizio's earpiece and gets to know it was Fabrizio all the way who did all this. Upon her realization, Fabrizio gets angry and calls a guy to take her away. Eliza wakes up to see herself seated at a huge dining table with her hands fixed by nails in the chair. All the farmers are there, and at the end of the dining table sits the mayor. She orders everybody to start eating. Eliza starts crying in pain and helplessness, and everybody mocks her moans. The mayor moves up to her and tells her that this is the New Age Mafia. Meanwhile, the police pull up. Eliza cries for help, but is ignored, and the mayor leaves the place in a cop car. Eliza is then taken into a room with screens. They turn on, and there she witnesses how everything in the past 2 days was being recorded by cameras, and it was all a setup for some kind of show. Fabrizio comes online, and Eliza confronts him about everything. He acts as a psycho and says how they murder the people and create horror movies out of them. Eliza then laughs and mocks him for creating stupid movies with zero originality and how they suck. Fabrizio gets angry and disconnects the call. Eliza then decides to free herself in the most agonizing manner. She slips her hands out of the nails, slowly and painfully, then get out of the place to see a whole setup of movie crew, RV vans parked, tents made, equipment scattered here and there. She walks into a tent and sees cameras and all of the masks of the farmers in the 3 nights. The next moment she hears a thud in Fabrizio's voice. He's in the RV shouting about how Eliza destroyed the whole set. Meanwhile, a girl's voice can be heard saying how dumb Fabrizio is. It's then revealed that the girl is Chiara. She's well and alive and is the director of the whole thing. At that moment, Eliza catches Chiara speaking and later argues with Fabrizio, which ruins her mood and she decides to take revenge. Chiara gets prepared for the set, and as she walks out of the RV, she gets faced by Eliza holding a shotgun in her hand. In one bang, Eliza shoots Chiara in the chest and she's thrown backwards. Fabrizio shits his pants upon the scene and slowly walks out. Eliza tries to shoot him, but the gun doesn't fire. Fabrizio tries to get to her, but she reloads and shoots him at the knee. He falls down and starts to crawl away. Eliza now sets the video cam on recording and walks up to Fabrizio, who's down at the ground. He begs for mercy and asks her to spare him. Upon knowing that it's being recorded, Fabrizio talks shit, for which he gets rewarded by the shotgun nozzle in his mouth and a shot that blows his brains out. Eliza then comes out to the camera and says, "There's your ending." She trudges down the woods slowly. She hears a sound behind her and turns to see a young boy in swimwear. He runs away upon seeing her and she follows him. They cross a fence, and to her amazement, Eliza sets foot on the public beach, a normal beach where people are just sitting, enjoying and using their cell phones. A dramatic transition from all the wilderness to a serene, peaceful